Welcome to this project where I'm going to show you how I made this paper jar from scratch. I started out with some book pages and I rolled them quite tightly with the help of a skewer, and I glued the ends down with a little bit of PVA glue. I carefully rolled each and every page, trying to make sure to keep the tube the same width. And when I had a good amount, I started gluing them together to make longer strips. And then I started rolling them up, flattening and rolling them up, kind of like in a spiral, as I'm trying to create a disc by rolling up these tubes of paper. And I'm adding PVA glue as I go, and I just keep rolling and rolling with my fingers, trying to keep it as tight as possible and attaching more tubes of paper as I go. It had a pretty good start and I was managing to keep the coil tight, but as the disc was growing, I was facing a lot of issues with the coil not wanting to stay tight, slipping and becoming misshapen. So I gave up on the PVA glue and I went to hot glue, which dries very quickly, but it's also a bit difficult to handle because obviously it's hot and it's very easy to burn your fingers. I for one have definitely exfoliated my fingers very thoroughly during this project, but with the help of the hot glue I managed to make these two really nice neat discs. So I'm cutting out some scrap cardboard for the main body of the jar, and I'm using the corrugation of the cardboard to help me roll it and shape it into the circular shape that I want. So with more hot glue, I'm attaching the walls of the jar to one of the discs, which is going to be the base. And I'm uniting that ring of cardboard to make the walls of the jar. Earlier, I cut another strip of cardboard, this one narrower, and I'm just gluing it to the middle because I'm trying to achieve a sort of barrel shape on this jar, so I needed something in the middle to bulk it out. When I'm done with that, I'm using thinner cardboard and I'm cutting out equal strips. I'm going to use these to create that barrel shape, as you can see here. I'm of course measuring and marking my pieces to make sure that they will fit nice and cutting them to size. And when they're ready, I'm going to curl them as well. This makes it a little bit easier to manipulate while dealing with the hot glue. I'm making sure that they are very neat inside and then attaching them on the outside as well. But I'm more concerned in making sure that the inside, they all fit perfectly next to each other, because the inside of the box is going to be a lot harder to make neat in the end than the outside. So I'm just taking my time, holding the strips down until the glue catches and making sure that I make this shape work and that I don't press too hard on the outside. Unfortunately, I had a little bit of a gap, so I am cutting a thin strip to make sure that there is no big gap, and I'm just going to use this strip to complete the shape. And although not quite perfect, I'm happy with the result, and I'm going to fill in those really large gaps on the outside, mostly with hot glue. And it's actually helping with the structural integrity of the jar itself. I've just realized that the lid may be a little bit too big now with the added bulk, so I'm just unrolling the disc and taking off a little bit of rolled paper to make the disc smaller. And I've realized I should attach a ring of cardboard on the inside to make sure that the lid of the jar would never accidentally slip inside and get stuck. First I thought a thin piece of cardboard would suffice, but then I changed my mind and now I'm attaching the corrugated cardboard. I think in the end it actually adds to the handmade aesthetic of the little jar. I wanted to have a sort of handle on the lid of the jar, so I went into my stash of buttons. These are actually vintage buttons that I got from my mother a number of years ago, and I just picked out 3 different ones that are going to make the shape that I wanted, and I'm slightly sanding them down so that they're a bit less shiny, and that making sure that the hot glue catches really well. And as you can see, just with these 3 little buttons, I was able to make a very nice looking handle. I'm also trimming a little bit more from the lid because it's still not fitting quite right, but with the trimming it fits perfectly. To make the jar nicer and to fill in a lot of the gaps, I made a mixture of tile grout, PVA glue and water, and I'm using my fingers to rub it in and let it get into those really deep cracks. However, I'm not completely bulking out the shape. I still want to have that texture that the spiral made, and I think it makes it more interesting if it has not a smooth surface. So I'm using the leftover tile grout mixture to apply it all over. This is after about 8 hours of drying, and the bulk that I added with the tile grout mixture made the lid too big again, so I'm just using a nail file to sand it down. And I'm also sanding the inside of the box a little bit to reduce the size. Moving on to painting, first I'm going to paint everything in a coat of black. I'm using acrylic paint as always, and I'm just covering the whole surface thoroughly. The tile grout actually is really helpful because it's kind of semi-absorbent and gives a really good tooth for the paint to catch. And when the black paint dried, I'm adding a green. This is going to be a sort of undertone. It's not necessarily going to show up very evidently in the final piece, but I wanted to use the same green that I'm going to be using on the leaves. These are just some silk leaves, and I'm just removing them from their wire stems because I didn't need that stiffness. And I'm just using the same green paint to color these leaves. I knew that I wasn't going to need the very bottom part of the leaves, so I didn't even bother to try and paint them. You will see later on what I mean. And I'm also using a few smaller silk leaves. These will be removed from their stems. And I'm using a little bit of yellow paint to catch all of those edges, and I'm basically just dabbing it on. I know it kind of looks like a pumpkin right now, but that is not the intention. I'm using a little bit of that yellow to go over the leaves, dry brushing to catch that texture. And now moving on to a nice blue and dry brushing over the whole surface of the jar. You may see that I have some silk roses that I prepared, but in the end I'm not using them in the final project, so there was no point in me showing you how I was painting them. So I'm using a little bit of copper metallic paint to rub all over the leaves to catch that texture even more. And I always like adding metallic paints to my finished projects. I'm using this shimmery blue acrylic paint. It has very low quantity of pigment, but it has a lot of the shimmery stuff, so I'm just covering the whole jar in this everywhere. And when that dried, I used the same copper metallic paint to rub on my fingers and catch all of those beautiful textures again. And you can see how shiny it turns out in the end. Because of those green undertones that I painted on early, it doesn't look like it's just a blue thing. It has these layers of colors. And here I am gluing on the green silk leaves. I'm using PVA glue for this. And I just went around the whole box and attached them to the bottom part, slightly overlapping them. And I'm just cutting down the smaller leaves, and I'm going to be attaching them with hot glue to the lid. PVA glue would have held as well, but because the lid is so textured, I didn't want to be standing there holding down each leaf for a few minutes with my fingers until the glue caught. So I just turned my hot glue gun back on and used it to finish the job. And I'm of course cutting off the excess of those leaves at the bottom. And there it is. My little paper jar is finished. It's really satisfying to have something like this that's actually been made from scratch, because it's just paper and cardboard. I hope you enjoyed watching my video. Please do let me know your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear any feedback. I hope you're having a nice day. Thank you for watching. Bye.